Hi, this cartoon was probably the last time I liked the C.O.P.S. Andrew, and this is Gayties Toys. So today we're talking about C.O.P.S. Not these C.O.P.S, these C.O.P.S. The Vastly Better Show. It stands for Central Organization of Police Specialists and sort of fits into that G.I. Joe notion where G.I. Joe was, military specialists. Each character was the best of the best. This is sort of the C.O.P.S version of that. I had considered doing all four of the women characters from C.O.P.S as individual entries, but I don't think the franchise warrants it. I think doing each of them, there's not enough there. If I did them all at once, there's too much there. So for my format, I'm going to do C.O.P.S and then Crooks. And if you know me outside of these videos, you know my supply side of crime and how I, view these two characters. So both the C.O.P.S toy line and cartoon by Deke Entertainment was in 1988. This is sort of, late 80s. We're getting into Turtle Scout territory. A lot of, companies were just throwing stuff at the wall, hoping anything would stick. When it came to this thing, it was a strange brew. They had very tall, very lanky figures. They didn't really fit in with sort of the more standard 3 3/4, 4-inch figures. But nevertheless, they were very cool, and they all came with pop caps, basically. You would just put them through guns or their accessories, and they would just sort of explode like little fireworks. And it was kind of dumb, but kind of fun. I had just the one, TikTok, and he was a very late edition, very stupid character, but loved him and his little furry mohawk. The story is that in Empire City in the year 2020, where no pandemic had occurred, there was a FBI agent who would later become Bulletproof. He was gunned down, basically, kid show, and he decided to create a new organization to tackle all the gangsters in Empire City, essentially creating C.O.P.S. He was also the one character who was the narrator of the program. He was in essentially every episode, accordingly. It's also noteworthy that he's black, and let's celebrate that. In terms of the two women we're talking about today, there's Mirage and there's Mainframe. We'll start with Mirage, because I don't much like her. Mirage was essentially the vice cop, where every cop had sort of, their own specialty, as we mentioned before. She was sort of the Lady J-ish character, kind of undercover, very, run-of-the-mill cop. And unfortunately, there was another cop, Longarm, who had a family, a wife, a cool backstory. He was second in command. He had this incredible, handcuff shooting armband. He was so much more interesting. And so when it came to Mirage, the writers were like, she's a master of disguise. But the problem is they sort of took this notion that she was bland and unrecognizable and could easily blend into a crowd, and they applied that to her character. I mean, I'm sure there's fans out there. I welcome your comments. Convince me that she's cool, but really just unfortunately such a drab character. On the flip side of that, there's Mainframe, who is a kind of a Barbara Gordon Oracle kind of character, where she's sort of back at home base on the computer. She would have go on missions every now and then, but by and large she was sort of like the woman back at HQ giving out orders kind of thing. But because of that, she was in just generally more episodes than Mirage, so she kind of got a bit more of a bump in popularity and recognizability within the brand. I also mentioned before there are some ancillary characters in C.O.P.S that are women as well. Hightower's wife is one. There's a few others, but I think the one worth talking about is Commissioner Highwater. Now, if Bulletproof and maybe Mirage are providing some representation in the show, you cannot tell me that Highwater is just serving bull dagger dyke. She's just pussy first in the door being like, here's what I want, bitch. Unfortunately, being the girl cops, led to the trope of it all. There was more than one episode where they were, on a mission because they were women. One was where both Mirage and Mainframe were supposed to, look into a spa that Misdemeanor had run. In another episode, Bulletproof essentially forced Mainframe to go into a beauty contest because, again, Misdemeanor and Nightshade were entering it, and they were wondering why. I mean, these were just, girly girl episodes, and it was so on the nose. And by this point, in the late 80s, we'd seen it. He-Man did it with the Teela and Evil-Lyn episode. G.I. Joe did it with that Conch episode where all the men were hypnotized by the variants. I mean, it's been done to death. I mean, even Star Trek in the animated series in the 70s had done something very similar. So by this point, it wasn't so much icky as it was boring, predictable, just unwelcome. If you've been watching these videos for any amount of time, you know what I'm going to say next. It was Hasbro, and it was the late 80s. They were trash. No figures were planned. There was some 1989 Toy Fair magazines, that were floated out there where we saw a few extra characters in what would be sort of, the final wave of C.O.P.S. None of the women were included, and there's no real evidence to suggest that they were ever even intended. So I mean, these kind of fall into the visionaries of it all, where it's like, they were, in the cartoon for the girl viewership, but that's it. There's no plans to put them, those faces to plastic. Unfortunately, the final verdict is also very predictable. As much as Hasbro had, a tendency to not make women in the 80s, they have a tendency not to make anything in, the 2020s. They go off about how, they have such huge brands, have huge licenses, but they sit on the ones they have. They're not, letting other people play with their toys, such as Visionaries, C.O.P.S, that kind of thing. So nothing's been done. The one thing that came out of it was that Fresh Monkey Fiction had done a series of PVC figures for a few of Hasbro's brands. One of them was C.O.P.S. They only made 5, one in, I think green, one in orange, and then they actually did like a painted version as well. The 5 characters they chose, none of them were of course women, but that said, I think they made the right call. They could have included Misdemeanor from the Crook side, but I mean, this is the point in the video where I might say like a third party or a smaller company might take over. You never know. I mean, I think there is a general love of the show and the property. It's not one of the big ones, it's not one of the greats, but I think people do kind of think back and have fond memories of it. So very possible. But as it stands now, Hasbro is not going to do anything with it. And unless someone else sort of picks up the reins, legally or otherwise, I wouldn't expect any of these characters to be made. And that's it for our look of the ladies of C.O.P.S. Stay tuned for the Crooks, which will be much more exciting in the future. In the meantime, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you next time on MIA 80s Life.